period.
My sons, I promise to teach you the secrets of my ages. This world is the first step on your journey.
Your sons, Atreus. Do you know what they did? They burned their Myst linking books in front of me. They took everything I had.
Enter the worlds of Myst, where every door you open, every path you choose, turns another page of the mystery.
When we found out we had gotten the contract to do Myst 3, I mean, it was such an overwhelming honor. The only thing you could really equate it to is being in the film industry and having George Lucas say, "I'd like you to make the next Star Wars for me."
There were certain themes in the game that we really wanted to stay consistent with, but we also wanted to add technology that would let the player look 360 degrees around them. We're not hiding anything. It's a complete world.
To say that we had a lot to live up to is a horrible understatement. There are millions of people that have played Myst and Riven. There are millions that have such high expectations of what Myst 3 has to be that it's almost daunting. Myst was a remarkable product when it first came out in 1993. A company by the name of Cyan produced the product. It's a phenomenon in the game industry. No game has ever sold that well.
The premise behind the Myst series is that this culture called the Dunny have found a way to link to the infinite possibilities that there are in the world by writing these books. And essentially, the great thing about this from a designer's perspective is that you can let your imagination wander. Anything that can be imagined exists somewhere. All you have to do is write it.
Atreus, is that you? Come to rescue your book so soon?
The really early decision that we made was to try to create a story context that would really offer us the opportunity to create a lot of deliberate puzzles. The lesson age concept gave us a great foundation to start from.
My sons, I promise to teach you the secrets of my ages. This world.
The idea behind the lesson age concept began with a question. I was looking at Myst Island from the original game, and I was thinking, why would someone who has the ability to write a link to a world with such diverse and unusual elements within it? Well, if Atreus wanted to educate his sons about certain fundamental concepts, then he would write a linking book in such a way that it would incorporate these diverse elements. And it was really from there that the idea of these teaching ages arose.
This this what you expected, Atris? When you followed me here, hoping to reclaim, release...
One of the challenges of telling a story in an interactive game is that you can't always control what sequence of events is going to occur in the game. So in order to make a story work in Exile, we had to come up with ways in which we could tell the story from various directions.
What's the matter, Atris? Can't remember how things work?
You'd get snippets of the story the more you progress through the game.
You've returned, but where's Relishan?
I think what Cyan managed to capture in the Myst games is a world that felt very bizarre and surreal and intriguing, but at the same time somehow familiar. They would take these things that were perhaps medieval or Baroque and juxtapose them in a certain way that was impossible in our own world. And I think that made it very accessible for a lot of people. What I really wanted the designers to explore was the boundaries of what was defined as an age. In Myst and Riven, you see an age as this island within sort of an endless sea in this world. And for us, that could be anything.
The environments of Exile aren't meant to be intimidating. Jananan is a very tropical environment and sort of a rock climber's paradise. Voltaic has sort of a Grand Canyon feel, a very majestic feel. Tamana is the new home for Atris and Catherine and their baby Yisha, so we wanted something that was very familiar, very Myst and Riven-like. Some of the other environments are very different.
The original idea we had behind Vidana, or the Life Age, as we referred to it in production, was to gather as much life and enrichment as possible into one area. This is basically all about life. The idea of the inverted tree was taking something normal and tweaking it and making it a little abnormal. Taking the tuft of the tree and turning that into the enclosure or the living space and letting everything else fall into the ocean, and then going for the absolutely radical. Technologically speaking, I mean, we ran into all sorts of issues. I was no longer confined to a flat two-dimensional map. I had to work three-dimensionally. I had to basically come up with another way to model this thing out. Everything was a challenge in this one.
It is amazing how much work it takes to put together a project like this. You sort of have to step back and say, we are going to build the best game we can possibly build. We are going to put our heart and our soul into it.
One of the first steps in achieving the graphics was to make sure that we had quality personnel. Our designers had to be top-notch. Our modelers and texture artists had to be some of the best in the industry. We had a lot of artists that were already using 3D Studio Max here at Presto Studios, so we started looking into the package and seeing how well it could do high-res, pre-rendered graphics for our game. The animators did a couple of tests early on, and the results were very positive.
The first challenge I faced on the Age of Junanan was building the terrain. I started out with a low-poly proxy surface, which let us mass things in really quickly. Then I took that and subdivided it down with a subdivision surface technology in Max called NURMS. Basically what this does is takes this kind of square, flat, low-poly surface and smooths it out so it looks nice and smooth and organic. The next step of the process is to paint custom displacement maps for each of the pieces of geometry that will be in the terrain. And so what that allows us to do is actually paint the geometry instead of having to hand model every crease and bump and edge that goes into all this complex rock and terrain. One of the last things that we do when we're working on Myst 3 is something that we've kind of dubbed the Greeble Pass. We go ahead and go through the entire age and add things like grass, weeds, debris, you know, just the kind of things that bring the age to life.
I think with Exile, we really felt we had the opportunity to push the boundaries of pre-rendered 3D graphics to really create an exceedingly detailed, realistic world. What I really wanted the textures to provide for the player was that connection to the real world. The texture artists had a fairly large resource to draw from in the library that we've created over the last 8 years of developing photorealistic adventure games. But for Exile, in fact, we really found that the things that we were doing were so different that we needed to find new source material for almost everything that we did. The most difficult thing was to create textures that you couldn't really find a source for, but that had to look realistic. An example of that was the giant tusk building in Jananin. That texture had to be very recognizable as being sort of a bone-like structure, and yet the scale of it was just absolutely immense. And that texture had to hold up both from a distance without repeating and up close where you could see every little bump and crack in it.
With the puzzles, we really wanted the player to have a clear idea of what they were going to do and what they were trying to solve, and be able to see the outcome of their trials right away. We decided to do prototypes very early on. We would do 3D animations to show what things might look like and how you would interact with them, or we'd do things in Director where we would actually script a puzzle, and you'd be able to solve it there on the computer before it was visually beautiful.
One of the things that we really felt we needed to do was to educate the player and prepare them for the challenges ahead. A lot of the ages are filled with things that you've never seen before, and we can't expect players to be able to look at them and just through their design be able to figure out what they do. When they approached a puzzle later on in the game, we wanted them to have something in the back of their mind, something that they had seen before that they would intuitively relate to the challenge that was placed in front of them. A great example of this was Venus flytrap in Savidro's lair at the bottom of the tower in Jananin. It served a story purpose in showing the development that Savidro had put into these traps that he had laid for Atris, but at the same time it gave us a way of foreshadowing the puzzle that was to come. In my own opinion, I think that lighting was probably the most powerful tool that we had in creating these worlds. The mandate that I really put on each of the animators was to, with every scene that they created, to create something that would be a back-of-the-box picture. After Riven, I think players had an expectation of having more life in a Myst world. With the Squee, we saw a great opportunity to have a puzzle by manipulating that creature.
The first step of my job for realizing the animation of the Squee was to build the model. Once I've got a good wireframe mesh built, then I go ahead and build the material that tells the surface of the Squee how it should react to light. The last part of that is actually building fur. We actually have a little plug-in in Max that models each individual hair on the surface of the Squee. Once everything is in place, then I go ahead and build a virtual skeleton that will sit inside the Squee, which is what I animate.
Almost every animation in the game requires a very specific sound. The ocean water lets you know that there's this vast ocean out there. A little bit of wind makes it feel real. So when sound first comes in, it really sets the mood for the entire environment.
Creating a sound effect, because of the meticulous detail in Exile, it's never quick. Organic sounds are very difficult to create because of the tools that I'm using. But on the flip side, a mechanical sound is much more involved. Some of the sounds that I use in, for instance, the observatory are extremely mechanical. Every process within that observatory is powered by this huge clock-generating, mechanical, looping, rhythmic thing. The elements that I put into this sound, I mean, there's probably 50 or 60 playing at any time.
Real concern and action.
Atris usually doesn't keep people waiting here this long. He's just been so concerned about his books.
Myst 3 was a very complicated video shoot. There's a lot of very specific camera techniques, lenses used, that type of thing. Every single light that was in the computer-generated world, we would match on stage with a real physical light. And we'd use all kinds of gags, things to block to simulate leaves, or cutouts to simulate doorways. All of these kinds of things help to sell the shot. When the character walks into the room and the light falls on them properly, you can't tell what's reality and what's computer generated.
I suggest that you think very carefully about using it. Because the one thing I know about linking books, the doors stay open. Don't close behind you.
We had a really tricky shot in Exile. The idea was Atris walks in one end of the study, and Savidro sort of links in behind. And we wanted to have this single continuous shot where the camera turns and looks at Atris and then turns all the way around and sees Savidro. The final composite with all of its elements actually took place over the course of 2 months. You have 4 pieces of video, you have special effects, you have the fire, you have the curtain falling away, and on top of that you have the camera swinging around, you know, wherever it wants to go. Getting that effect done in the can, looking right, was probably the most difficult video I've ever had to do in my entire life. Basically, we take the original footage, which is shot on blue. We knock the blue out of that, so all we have is the character that remains. We drop the character on top of the background, and that gets us 80% of the way there. In Combustion, we put it all together, sort of timing this piece over here, and because Combustion is actually a 3D compositing tool, we're able to move the camera and swing it around. It's a tremendous opening to the game.
The most challenging aspect of doing a score like Myst 3 is that you really don't get a chance to see the game until very near the end, and by that time your music's written. I began to develop themes very early on. The main character has his own theme, and he has sort of a dark and a light side to his personality, where you have the really dark, tortured guy, and then you've got, you know, his sort of childlike self with a blue soprano, actually singing the exact same music, but it takes on a whole new meaning. Then there's also sort of the theme of the entire game, with all the choir singing in the language of this new title. I sent the first draft to Presto, and they're like, okay. And it was a really unfortunate place to start, because that really was the umbrella under which everything else could be tweaked and developed. Music is the unseen character in any media form. It does become something that the listener may not really be thinking about, but yet affects their perception of what's actually happening on the screen, whether it be a computer screen or a television or movie screen.
Leading the Dunny, those brave men and women who are building a new life for themselves, I realize I've been given another chance as well.
We designed this unseen character together, between Presto and myself, to heighten the drama, to heighten the experience.
Myst and Riven presented all their images as sort of a slideshow. There'd be a single image and then you'd click and see another image. With Myst 3 Exile, we really wanted to immerse the player much more than just a slideshow. So we sort of combined the pre-rendered graphics with the technology of real-time 3D, and the player is able to see beautiful photorealistic graphics, but look 360 degrees around them and have a lot of freedom of movement.
We call it Tamana. We moved here after H was finished writing Relition.
One of the big breakthroughs for us was finding a way to place movies and animations in the scene in such a way that they would continue to play no matter which direction you were looking. You could be looking up, down, sideways, continue to pan around and around, and the movies continue to play.
You know, this trip is exactly what Atris needs right now.
That's something that you couldn't do in Myst and Riven. This is really a step in technology for us. Well, the water technology in Exile, we wanted to do something a little different and a little better. We wanted to do more than just squish the pixels to the left and to the right or up and down. One of the coolest features about the water technology is the way we gave it the appearance of fading off toward the horizon. It really gives you a strong sense of distance when you're looking at the scene.
The most exciting part for me is being at the end of the chain and actually being able to get my feet wet, programming some of the things in the game. The building of the worlds probably takes one person a month or 6 weeks per world. It's fairly easy to get the navigation working and the animations in, but the implementation of the puzzles is usually the challenging part. In a real-time game, the graphics are drawn every frame, maybe 30 frames per second while the player is playing. But because Exile is a pre-rendered game, that means we're generating the graphics much earlier and they're fixed. We have to account for all the possibilities. This sometimes causes quite a headache for all the people involved because a puzzle may have 60 to 100 to 200 different possibilities, all of which have to be accounted for before the player plays the game. It was pretty amazing to see the first environment come together in the game. All of the different parts that had gone into it and we'd reviewed for months and months suddenly came together, and we were actually able to experience the environment as a player would. This is about as close to virtual reality as you might get.
The greatest thing about Exile is I really feel that we achieved everything that we set out to achieve. We have a great game that sits as the sequel to Myst and to Riven. It is true to the story. It is true to the characters. The ages are beautiful. I think people are going to remember this game for a long time.